How's it, everyone? Welcome to another entry in my court checklist series right here on Open Court. So on today's segment, let's have a little discussion or debate. What do you guys think is more important, the strings or the racket? So I know a lot of people ask this question. I've been asked this question a lot. So before I give my opinion on this subject, I wanted to ask a few of my hitting partners which they thought is more important. So let's hear from them. All right, guys, I'm here with one of my hitting partners, John. He's a longtime friend of mine, so I wanted to ask him what he thinks is more of a factor. What do you think is more important, strings or racket?
I think for me, I notice more so the racket, you know, and I think it's just because every racket's kind of different in terms of the head size, the thickness of the beam, even the string patterns, right? And I think when I think about it, like how I use the 𝐥𝐸𝐬𝐿, right?
Yeah.
98, and then now I'm using the speed.
Yeah.
I definitely feel a difference between the two.
Yeah. All right, very good points. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
All right, I'm here with Austin. He's one of my former students from high school. So Austin, what do you think is a bigger factor, the strings or the racket?
The racket.
Why is that?
Because there's so much more of a difference between like a 12-ounce racket and a 10-ounce racket. But strings just add like just a little bit of it, like difference in spin or power and control. But if you're thinking overall, if you're using different strings on the same racket, it'll like pretty much feel almost the same. Whereas like a completely different weighted racket will feel completely different.
Okay, yeah, some good points. Definitely a 12-ounce racket will feel way different from a 9-ounce racket. But what would you say to somebody who is looking for like a slight, like he's debating between like a 𝐕𝐸𝐬𝐿 98 and a 𝐕𝐸𝐶ore 98 where the specs are similar? Would you recommend them changing the entire racket to suit them, or maybe just a string change might be more, makes more sense?
So like the specs are identical, right? Almost
Identical, but like obviously the 𝐕𝐸𝐶ore and the 𝐕𝐸𝐬𝐿 have different feels even though the spec is different. But in that case, would you say changing out the string might be better, or do you think like going to a whole different racket might be better?
I feel like if you already have one, then just sticking with the racket you have and changing like the string and tension might be better. But if you're deciding between a racket, then it's mostly the frame that you should decide on.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. All right, thank you, Austin. All right, guys, I'm here with Kim. She's a former student of mine. She played high school tennis for me. So Kim, which do you think is a bigger factor, the strings or the racket?
I personally have to say the strings because I used to switch rackets a lot and I didn't really notice the difference between the way that I hit. But then every time I change the tension of my strings or just the type of strings in general, I've noticed a big difference. So I just feel like that plays a bigger factor.
Okay, so just for reference, what string do you currently use?
I use a hybrid of cyclone and dynamite.
Okay, yeah, so that's a poly and a synthetic gut. All right, thank you, Kim. So what's more important, the strings or the racket? I'd like to give my opinion on this debate. I personally think that the strings are more important than the racket. That's not to say that the racket is not important at all. It definitely is, but I think the string has a little more influence on the outcome of a match and how well you play. There are a few reasons why I believe this. Number one is that the strings, not the racket, is the part that's directly making contact with the ball. So when the ball makes contact with your strings, the kind of vibrations and the feedback that goes into your arm, that plays a huge part in not just what kind of shots you hit, but also on your confidence level. Secondly, if you don't really like the response of said racket, you can change the response by changing the strings. If you want something more crisp and lively, maybe try a crisp and lively poly like the ones I like, Headlinks Tour, 𝐥𝐸𝐬𝐿 Tourbite, etc. Or maybe you're looking for something softer, you can try nylon, multi-filament, or even natural gut. If you want more spin, try some of those shaped polys on the market. Depending on what kind of response, what kind of playability you're looking for, there are so many different types of strings, and you can just change that up to get whatever you're looking for. Next, if you already have a racket you like I really like this Head Extreme Tour. I also really like the Head Speed Pro, the Head Boom Pro. There's a number of rackets I really like, and if you've already found that racket, even though it's not perfect, it might make more sense just to change the strings. First of all, it's a lot more cost effective just to change the strings rather than to change the whole racket every single time you feel something's off. And secondly, just by changing the strings, you can also hybrid. There are so many different options out there to get the response that you're seeking. And lastly, you can pretty much play with a crappy racket that has good strings in it. But the reverse is not necessarily true. If you have a really good racket with terrible strings, you're not going to be able to play well effectively. The proof is in the pudding. So many people say that when the tension drops in their strings, the racket becomes unplayable. So then just cut it out and string it fresh, and you should be able to play to the level that you expect. So these are some of the reasons why I think that strings are more important than the racket. This is also the reason why on this channel I mostly do string reviews, because I think that it makes more sense both from a playability perspective as well as a financial perspective to just kind of change strings and tinker with that and experiment. You can also tinker with your racket by adding weight in certain places. You don't need to overhaul and completely change your racket. So I personally think that the strings are a little more important than the racket itself. So let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think is more important, the strings or the racket? Thank you for watching this court checklist right here on Open Court. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on Open Court.